I will be going through just the basics of how to make it easy and comfortable to go through a primary PCI. As soon as a patient comes in, the first things that we would like to see is to clinically assess the patient to find out the window period, because that would actually help us in finding out how much the thrombus burden is, what kind of myocardium we're going to revascularize, the Phillips class to actually stratify whether we need support of the anesthetist and whether we need to actually take care of the ventilation prior to going ahead. The risk factors, because we need to actually limit our contrast and see if we are actually dealing with a patient who's actually having a compromised renal function. Look at the physical examination in terms of whether the patient has any obvious murmurs or has any kind of decreased breath sounds, which would actually help us to actually think differently and probably change our mode of treatment. And also very important is to look at the hemodynamics and the oxygenation, because this is the first thing that we actually need to look into before we start off the PCI. And no kind of haste has to be in terms of intervening before we actually stabilize the hemodynamics and the oxygenation, because this would lead to catastrophe. We'd like to look at the rate and the rhythm of the patient and see to it that we settle down the arrhythmias if there are while we are taking the patient to the cath lab. Simultaneously, in patients with RV, in patients with inferior MI, it's very important that the subtle changes of RV MI we need to see, because it's very important with the patient having a proximal RCA with a lot of clot burden. RCA, the whole course of the disease is very, very torrential on the table as well, and it's very important at this point to see that the hemodynamics are stabilized. We try and be very careful with putting in a pacing wire as well, because we may actually perforate. And similarly, there is many a times we have actually seen that the patient has a typical angina and the ECG looks apparently normal, but the echo actually in these circumstances have helped us to actually go ahead and intervene when there is an RWMA. And also the echo helps us in looking for the mechanical complications and the ventricular function. We are very bothered about the RV function when we are actually going in to intervene, because low cardiac output is a major issue. And we would probably, in this situation where we have a borderline hemodynamics with LV dysfunction, probably go in with the intra-aortic balloon pump prior to actually starting the intervention. Pre-medication, simultaneously these things need to be done. In addition to looking for these and stratifying the patient, it's very important that we pre-medicate the patient properly, and one of the nurses or we ourselves need to be very sure that pre-medication has been given on time and proper pre-medication has been given. The patient is below 65, has not had any kind of intracerebral complications earlier. It's better to give prasugrel now with 60 milligram loading of prasugrel before we go, because it's faster acting. But if a patient is above 65 or has any intracranial events earlier, it's better to go ahead with clopidogrel 600 mg after the Credo trial. Statins of 80 milligrams. There are trials now coming in whether 160 milligrams is good, but as of now there are no specific recommendations, so 80 milligram of statin should do. And other medication in terms of whether we need to give him a bolus of fluid, start inotropes before we start moving him from the ER to the cath lab is very important. Now, once we are in the cath lab, we need to see whether we actually need to go femoral or we need to take a radial access. And this has to be told to the cath lab even before we actually move the patient from the ER to the cath lab, so that the staff there is ready and we waste lesser time and there is lesser confusion. If a patient is in cardiogenic shock, is going to require an IABP, or has complete heart block with hemodynamic compromise requiring a TPI, it's always better we go ahead with the femoral access. Take a venous access as well in these kind of circumstances. But there are instances where the patient has a complete heart block, hemodynamics are okay, the pulses are okay, there we go ahead, put in a venous access, put in a TPI or an IABP from the femoral, and go ahead and finish the intervention from the radial as well. Any cases where there are any vascular disease of the upper limb, obviously we go ahead with the femoral. But now issue is here in patients where we are going ahead with the femoral, bivalirudin is a good choice, because generally these patients where we are intervening, generally we are in a rush with cardiogenic shock. We may actually retrogradely puncture. We may take multiple punctures in circumstances where the pulses are not properly felt. Bivalirudin would be a good choice because it is shorter acting and would help in lessening the morbidities of hematomas. And radial basically doesn't help too much because we are anyway going to have a good vascular, we could close it well with proper compression. Now, as I told you, triage is extremely important. Wherever we think that the hemodynamics are not good, it's better to put in an IABP, wherever required a TPI, and ventilate the patient either non-invasive or invasive, where they give it time. It's very important that we give it time for people to settle down, unless we think that it's more important to actually open the coronaries before. Because generally what happens is any kind of contrast would further depress the myocardium, and that actually swirls off a vicious cycle, and this would actually be a catastrophic. So it's extremely important that any kind of metabolic acidosis is actually taken care of. Hemodynamics are taken care of before we actually start dealing with the coronaries themselves. So it's extremely important we take the hemodynamics into consideration first. Now, coming to the controversial topic of thrombosuction, it's a very important step to be done. We practice it in almost 90 to 95% of our PCIs, and we do it liberally. We see to it that we suck out at least 50 to 100 ml of contrast, run it through at least 2 or 3 times, and see that the clot burden reduces as much as possible. Even if we think that it's a pretty discrete lesion, we think that the thrombus burden is quite less, but still we try running through a thrombosuction as at least for one run to see how things are, because there is a lot of clot that is layered and could lead to a lot of slow flow in these circumstances. This actually has reduced our necessity of using GP2B3As. Our lab, I think our necessity of GP2B is less than 5 to 10%, probably less than that as well. And we've seen that the TIMI3 flows we have achieved are much better. The phenomenon of no reflow is much lesser, and we have saved a lot of, it's very cost effective as well if you see the overall picture. There are times when probably the thrombosuction may not go through, and the catheters being pretty flimsy, it's always better to still use a new catheter to see if we can go through, because at the end of the day, if you're using more 48 hours of GP2B3A, it almost comes to the same cost as using an export catheter. Anticoagulation, as I said, the use is actually very minimal in our lab. GP2B3A could be used more so in patients who have large thrombus burden, where we think that the flow is not adequate. Even after adequate thrombosuction is where we actually use it. And we are very, very skeptical when we are going through the femoral route, and we think that probably there could be an issue, because once there is an hematoma, we are in for a lot of trouble. Now, I'll just give you an example of what we went through. This is a 28-year-old guy, a smoker, who came to the hospital with an anterval ST elevation MI, was with a chest pain, a window period of 1 hour. He came at 11:30 p.m. This is 11:30 a.m. actually. We were actually just running him through all the things, and he had a VF torsides in the ER at 12:02. Actually, this is when he were actually shifting on the way to the cath lab. This was his film. He had a proximal LAD disease. We passed in a wire at 12:05. There was very little flow. Then 12:07, the thrombosuction was through. We sucked out a lot of clot. (12:08) again he had a VT-VF. 12:09 we actually went in to stent the artery. Had a good TIMI3 flow. At 12:15 he's in the post-cath ward, absolutely comfortable, and he was discharged on day 3. Had a good LV function at discharge. Now this is how it was, and I would recommend thrombosuction to be done more liberally, because and one more catch to this is basically it's better not to balloon dilate unless and until we see a lot of calcium in there, we see that the catheter is not going through, the thrombosuction catheter is not going through, it's better not to predilate with the balloon, because here we end up with a lot of distal embolization, and the incidence of no reflow is much higher when we are using a balloon to predilate. Now, I would like to end my talk by actually when not to do a primary PCI as well. This is a 30-year-old guy who had come to the ER. This is very recent. He's a smoker, had very tight disease with a lot of clot, which is actually extended. I'm sorry if this is not playing. He actually had borderline hemodynamics. We put in the IABP actually before we actually started injecting him as well. And I'm sorry, I'll just run you through that. And we actually didn't do anything but leave him alone and gave him GP2B3A for 48 hours. Did not intervene, did not pass in a wire. We didn't want to actually thrombosuck him also, because we thought there's a lot of clot actually distally as well. We'd probably distally embolize much more, and that's the reason we just left him alone with GP2B3A. Hemodynamically he stabilized, and I'm sorry, this is not playing. Actually, it opened up. We actually did the check angio. The second slide was basically the check angio. It opened up very well. There was no residual lesion, and he's gone home comfortably without any issues. And this is how, in certain cases where we think that we may actually complicate the issue by actually putting in a stent, we would actually leave it alone, because here we thought there was some amount of clot extending into the LMCA, and if we would have gone in and meddled with it, probably we would have distal embolized or probably embolized into the circ or in the LMCA, which would have actually led us to more trouble. Concluding, probably I would say that high level of expertise and skill is needed to tackle an acute MI situation. It is very important to be quick and but also to maintain cool, and it is also very important that we need to take the help of our colleagues and surgeons wherever required. At the end of the thing, I would like to say that it's very important to keep the patient's interest foremost. And in primary PCI, I would end by saying it's better to keep it simple and safe and be happy than to actually go in and do a lot of adventurous stuff. Bifurcations and all that, wherever we think that there's a lot of clot burden, it's better to come out and probably in that circumstance give more of GP2B3A, which should actually we have done a lot of check angios and seen later on which they have opened up well without any residual lesions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anuj, for a nice talk about primary PCI and acute MI.